I actually play out that scenario in my head. This week I've had a lot of the feelings of maybe I should start thinking about a plan B. Maybe I should have gone to uni. Maybe I should have gotten a job. Let's take that consideration and figure out what the alternative actually is. Let's play out that voice in the back of my head. Say I do quit and I go and get a job and I sell all my camera gear and I sell all this gear and I go and get a job. A year from now, am I going to be happy with that decision? A year from now, I'm going to sit back and go, what if I had just continued going for a little bit longer? What if I was only a month away from the moment where it all worked out? What happens if I do go down that route of the plan B and it just end up in a situation where I'm unhappy? That's the alternative. The alternative is not better. And usually that's the case. The alternative that your inner critic is recommending is not going to make you happier. It's not going to make you more fulfilled. It's not going to make you more successful. In fact, 99 or 100% of the time, it's actually going to make you less happy, less fulfilled, and less successful if you follow that inner critic. Welcome back. Welcome back to episode 21? 21? No. Let me check that for a second. 22. Episode 22 of the podcast. God, that's a representation of how my week's going. Don't even know what episode it is. I'm sitting here, I'm planning for this episode, and I got on and I don't even know what episode it is. But yeah, how's everyone doing this week? How's everyone's week been? I've just had a really weird week, to be perfectly honest with you. I've just had a really unproductive week where I've just been feeling weird. I've been feeling like flat is the only way to describe it. I just don't usually I can sort of rely on I think everyone feels flat. I should preface this by saying that 99% of my days I feel flat. 99% of the time I'm doing anything, I feel flat. I think that I just sort of surround myself with, and I spoke about this a few episodes ago, it's like I try to incorporate systems where, going to bed early or morning routines or eating healthy or exercise or, setting myself up to be in a position to do things that I know are good for me or I know are productive or I know are valuable, and sort of just constantly putting yourself in the best position to get something done or get what you need to get done. But this week it just I don't know, man. It was just I don't know. I think that this week it was just one of those cases where, the part of my mind that goes, fuck it, puts the hands up and goes, you know what? It's not even worth it. It's not even worth doing it. It's not even worth bothering. That was a very present part of my mind this week. It's a part of, I think it's always there. It is always there, but it's kind of, this week it was particularly strong. I think I am just sort of a bit over it, man. I'm a bit over this lockdown. I'm a bit over what's going on here in Melbourne. There is the part of me that's concerned as well, because I think I don't want to I think that this week it was just the list of things that were out of my control and the list of things that were in my control were kind of imbalanced. And I think that just sort of caught up with me to the point where it was God, I don't know. I don't want to sit here and complain, because I'm aware of the fact that no one, and I've said this in the podcast before, no one wants to talk. No one wants to sit and listen to someone complain. And this podcast, if you guys have obviously read the title of the podcast, it is going to be on this topic of how to cope with these sort of situations, how to cope with that imposter syndrome, how to cope with that self-doubt. I think that I'm going to branch, if you're wondering what I'm talking about doesn't really sound like imposter syndrome, I kind of treat these two the same in my mind. I kind of react and behave and cope with them in a very, very similar way. So I figured I could umbrella this whole episode into self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because I think they are pretty similar. I think it is similar parts of your psyche, similar parts of what triggers those feelings. It's normally, that internal dialogue, the critic in the back of your mind that makes you feel like you're inadequate and also makes you feel like, why should you bother? And I think that that's kind of what I've been experiencing a little bit this week. before I get into all of that, let's do some positives for a second here. Like, I had an amazing week of reading. I think that I just sort of, that's probably the one thing that I did sort of lean on this week. I don't know, I kind of thankfully towards the end of the week sort of recognized that, like, okay, this isn't, I'm not getting heaps done productive. I'm not being super productive. My work week's not going super well. At least using my spare time, or all the extra spare time that I do have for reading, will be something that I at least recognize, or at least feel is productive. So I got a heap of reading done this week. I finished listening to Deep Work by Cal Newport. Fantastic read. Really, really, really good read. I'm stoked about that book. I think it's all stuff that you already know. It's all stuff that makes sense, but it's spoken or delivered in a very, very simple and easy to understand way that kind of, it just, every single chapter is full of moments where you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I already knew this stuff, but you've put it in a way that's easy to process, easy to consume, and easy to understand. And I think that was the benefit of this book. And I said this, I think, when I started listening to it. Really, really good pairing with Essentialism and Atomic Habits. If you want to pair 3 books together and read them all at the same time, so just like jump between them, Atomic Habits, Essentialism, and Deep Work, all very, very good books. They cover the same sort of arena or the same genre or themes, but all of them have their own unique interpretations of those things. I think that they all come to the table with different techniques, different methods that you can sort of combine into a technique that's going to work for you. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. A lot of what Cal Newport said, I don't use. Like, I'm not going to use. There's a lot of that book, and I'm not going to spoil too much. It's not really a spoil because it's a personal development book. But he talks a lot about, organizing your time and prioritizing your, treating your schedule as, count it to the minute and always have something to do, because he talks about the fact that, yes, there is the side of you where you're only really going to get like 3 or 4 hours of deep work a day, but you are going to be, you're going to have the rest of your hours stolen by other things. So he kind of talks about how you should really prioritize your time. But in my mind, I'm an artist. If I get up in the morning and I'm working on a project and I get 2 hours of great work done, and then all of a sudden I, have something else on my schedule I need to do, but I'm stuck in an amazing flow state, I'm not going to pull myself out of a flow state and jump into something else. I'm just going to let that run out. So there's certain parts of my day that I just can't commit to that sort of thing. But there is also the side of me where it was just extremely valuable to understand the methodology behind a lot of those techniques. And I think it was a very, very good book to read. So highly recommend that. Deep Work by Cal Newport. I also just purchased on Audible Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's going to be my first Malcolm Gladwell read. I've been recommended his work so many times, so I'm super excited about getting into his body of work, because it's quite famous. I've also just finally gotten I can't remember the artist, but Turning Pro and The War on Art, which are 2 books that I've been highly recommended. I spoke about these last week, so they just arrived yesterday. I've finally started reading Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson. Another amazing read. This one's probably my favorite. I'm halfway through it, and it's by far my favorite relationship book I've read so far. A lot of them, I've really enjoyed the relationship books, but I think I'm so passionate about it that I kind of put up with some, not average, but I'm happy to I'm happy to slog my way through a relationship book sometimes. So, I really, really enjoyed Love Me, Don't Leave Me, but there was a little bit of a slog there. It was a little bit of a slog getting through that book, and this is just the opposite. I'm really, really enjoying this. And the last one that I'm finally starting is The Obstacle Is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I'm finally getting into that book, which I'm super excited about. Very, very good. Again, I'm sort of recognizing with Ryan Holiday's work that they kind of pick up occasionally, read a chapter, and then put it down books. They're not really a cover to cover, and I read cover to cover. I don't know if anyone else is like this, but I like to sit down at the end of the night for like an hour and a half and just read half the book. I like to read in that way, and I'm finding that Ryan Holiday's work is very just pick up whenever, take something from it, put it away, and then come back to it in a week or come back to it a couple days later. And so I'm enjoying that, but it has been tricky to sort of get used to the fact that I have to have 2 or 3 books ready to read each day or each night, because it's like, I don't want to. It's hard to get into a rhythm. It's harder. It's really much harder to get into that flow of reading a chapter and then another one and then another one, because each chapter is its own unique sort of story or unique sort of approach. But that's been my reading this week. Take that with a grain of salt if you aren't from Melbourne. The only reason I'm reading that much this week is because there's nothing else we can do. I've got so much free time at the moment with this, and obviously I should be filling my free time with YouTube. If you guys follow me on YouTube, you would know I've been inconsistent over there. There's plenty of other things that I should be consuming my time with, but like I said, I had a flat week. I had a really flat week, and I think that I just wanted to. I didn't feel like it. I really didn't feel like slogging out a work week. I would rather, try to revert back to the systems that I have set in place that make me feel productive, and one of those is reading at the moment. So, that's the value of having those systems set in place. If you guys have read the title, before I get into it though, I'm also I'm filming this episode. So if you are one of the people that messaged me saying that you enjoy the podcast, but you are more of a YouTube listener, the reason why I stopped doing it is just because it was more of a hassle than it is something that I just switch on and get done, because I have a DSLR, so I have to record and watch the timer, and it was just distracting me from the whole process. And then it's a long export and a long upload, and it was just a pain, and there wasn't enough people listening to it. But I got enough messages over the last 2 weeks where I was like, okay, this is something that I probably should do. Just like, it's not going to be anything special. I've barely even made eye contact with the camera, so I apologize to those of you who are watching. I'm now making eye contact with the camera. It is just essentially just to have a place, another place to have the podcast, rather than, just having it be audio. Maybe I'll try and figure out a way that I can make this interesting for the podcast listeners on YouTube. But honestly, a lot of the messages I did get were just people saying, I like to use the podcast, or I like to have it on in the background whilst I'm working, and YouTube is the easiest way to do that. So it is essentially just an audio podcast that I'm filming for the sole purpose of putting onto a platform that's based for video. So it's going to be nothing special, but it's up there if you want to check it out. It's on its own channel on Real Life Podcast on YouTube. If you guys, again, if you've read the title, I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome and self-doubt today, because I think that this week, before I get into this, these are things that I always feel. These are, there's no week, there's no day that goes by where I don't feel these things. So I don't want this to appear like I've had a shitty week and then this is the first time that I've ever done this. But there is the part of me where, as much as I've spoken about it in the past, where you don't want to sit and watch someone complain. You don't want to sit and listen to someone talk about their problems all the time, because that can just be like, why am I doing this? I want to hear positivity. I want to hear someone talk about talk about things that are going to motivate me. And I agree with that. I think that that's valuable. I think that's really, really valuable. But I also think that there's a part of you where it's like, fuck, man, does this guy ever take a break? Does this guy ever let up? There's the people that I follow, and I'm not going to name names, but there's definitely there's a point of diminishing returns with being motivated by someone. There's, at least in my mind, I've experienced in the past where there are people that I just wish they would post, for example, Matt Diavella, out of his entire body of work, I think the video that had the biggest effect on me was the one where he was in the process of, and this wasn't even the theme of the video, it was just halfway through the video, it was like, hey guys, halfway through this challenge, my anxiety ramped up and I felt like absolute shit. It was the journaling video, I think it was. And he really, really talked about that in that video, and that kind of hit me because it's like, I really admire him. I really admire his videos. I really admire his consistency. I admire a lot about him, but there's a point of diminishing returns where I'm like, fuck, does this guy ever let up? And when I saw him let up, that motivated the hell out of me because I was like, suddenly there was a chink in the armor. Suddenly I was like, oh, I can relate to this. I can do this. You know, if I am someone that goes through these issues, if I am someone who goes through these situations, so you know, there is those people out there that I watch their content and I watch them. I'm like, fuck, can he miss a training session? Can he miss something? Can he miss a day of work? Can he get on here and just be like, I feel like shit today? And I think that that's why I wanted to make this podcast or make this particular one, because I think that that's extremely valuable for people to recognize sometimes is everyone goes through this stuff. Regardless of whether they share it or not, everyone goes through the stuff that I'm going to talk about, or everyone has self-doubt. Everyone feels imposter syndrome. Everyone does. Everyone does. It's just a matter of whether they share it with you or not. And I think that that's kind of a valuable thing to remember because, yeah, it can get to the point where you're just like, come on, man. Come on, please. Show me a chink in the armor. Show me a weakness. Show me something to tell me that you aren't just this perfect person that is always excellent and never misses a workout and never misses a meal, never misses a day of work, never misses an upload, never does this, always on. And it's like, there's a point where I'm just like, I don't want to see that anymore. I don't want to see that. There's been people in the past that I stopped following or stopped watching or stopped consuming their content because I'm like, look, man, or look, girl, I can't keep sitting here going, that's great. Congratulations for being such a consistent person. So the reason why I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome and this sort of thing is this week to be quite honest with you, I just had a week where it was heavy on my mind. I had a week where, you know, usually it's a case where it's kind of 60-40, I would say. I would say about 40% of the time I'm in my own mind going, you know, there's voices in my own mind going, okay, why bother doing this? Or, you know, in the case of my content, it's usually with the YouTube videos, it's no one's going to watch this anyway, so why are you wasting so much time? Or with the podcast, it's every single week, and this is something that I have every single week right up until I hit record, and then usually until I listen to the podcast, and then again before I upload, and then whilst I'm waiting for people to send me messages or reviews or let me know that they enjoyed it, the entire time it's just, why do you feel like you have the ability or the experience or enough knowledge to share in the way that you're sharing? There is always that feeling. One of the things that gives me the most anxiety is, and this is ridiculous, but it's worth sharing with you, is every single week posting my podcast is, who's going to listen to this that might have an opinion of me or might feel a certain way or might not fully understand, you know, every other episode. Are they going to listen to what I'm saying right now and go, this person's full of shit? Like, that is something that I feel every single time I hit record. And I think that that's valuable to know, because usually it's about 40-60. 60% of the time I'm good. 60% of the time the voice in my head that goes, no, you're fine, stop listening to that person. And 40% of the time it's sitting there in the back of my mind telling me, why bother? But this week it was just a little bit more. This week it was certainly a little bit more. For me, imposter syndrome and self-doubt is you know, it's walking into a room and not knowing what to do. It's walking into a room full of new people, new opportunities, new experiences, and not knowing what to do. And I think that there is the part of me, before I get into how I deal with these sort of feelings, how I cope with these situations, and how I sort of, what I do on a daily basis, what I do and what I have done this week to get over this, I think that you can try to pay attention to why it's happening. Try to pay attention to what you're feeling, or why you're feeling certain things, or why you think those particular voices are coming up in those moments. Because I think that in that you can find some positivity. I think in that you can go, okay, I'm doing something to promote this. There's never a time beyond things that are outside of my control, which I think is the case this week with a few of the sort of feelings of self-doubt. But I think that 90% of the time, and I will talk about that sort of side of it where it is just out of your control, and it's like, what are you supposed to do when those situations come up that are like, God, I have no control here. But 90% of the time, or not even more, it's a case of there's a reason why that voice is coming up. There's a reason why you're feeling that way. And I think that there's that positivity that you can find in that. For me, and this is my experience alone. So if you are the kind of person that experiences crippling self-doubt and you don't know what to do with it, and you don't feel like you are in control, then try to take this with a grain of salt. But I do genuinely believe that this is, at least in my experience, and at least for a large majority of the people listening to this, it is that case of you're walking into a new room where you don't have the experience. You're walking into a room full of new people and you have to figure out a way to sort yourself through that situation, and you're unfamiliar. You know, that unfamiliarity, that feeling of not being in control, that feeling of, I don't know what to do here. I'm not capable enough, or this is unfamiliar. The reason why you're getting that is because you're challenging yourself, or you're putting yourself in, or at least in my experience, a lot of the time when I do feel these feelings, and like, for example, right now, a lot of it comes about from me doing something that is challenging, by me putting myself in a position where I'm not fully in control, me putting myself in a position where I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to be okay. I don't know if, what I'm doing is something that is valuable, or something that is certain, or something that is going to move me forward, or I'm just incapable. Starting something new, starting a new video, starting whatever it is, it usually comes about from a situation where, I feel challenged. And I think that alone can provide you with a little bit of a positive feedback loop through that self-doubt, to know that whenever those voices do come up, and before I get into coping with them and all that sort of stuff, I wanted to preface it with this, because there is the part of me that knows, like, okay, if I am feeling this, I'm challenging myself in the right ways. If I'm having a voice that comes up in the back of my head that goes, Tom, you are shit, I can look back at that and go, the only reason that voice is coming up is because maybe I am a little bit shit at this, but the only reason that's happening is because I'm challenging myself enough for me, or a part of my brain, to believe that. Because if I was just going along with it and doing stuff that I find easy, and going about my life in a way that doesn't really challenge me, going through the comfortable route, doing things that make me comfortable, then I'm never going to have those feelings come up. I might have certain self-doubt come up. I might have the part of me that's, the distracted part of me, or the part of me that feels like they compare themselves, or those sort of things. But I think the really powerful self-doubt of you're not good enough, or the really intense imposter syndrome, comes about from you're just challenging yourself. You're doing something that is difficult. You're doing something that you can, doing something that it puts you in a position where you don't know what you're doing. And I think that can be the positive that you can take out of this situation. And I think that's why I've been feeling it this week. I think that's why my feelings of self-doubt have been so chirpy, because there is a lot of uncertainty right now with not only the situation that's going on here in Melbourne, but I think I'm going to be moving interstate next year. That's a big change for me. I'm going to be moving interstate. There's the part of me that's unsure about the way my work's going to go. There's a part of me that all of a sudden has this podcast that wasn't around 6 months ago, that is now a part of my life, that I need to figure out, how is this going to slide into my future? How is this going to slide into my idea of what my goals were 6 months ago? Because now it's completely different. Now I'm like, okay, well, what do I do now? What do I do from here? How can I turn this into something, or not even that? How can I do the things necessary to put myself in the best possible position? And I think that those are all the questions that I've been asking myself this week. But the Ironman as well. It's like, I've been constantly asking myself, because as my training ramps up and up and up, there's a part of me that's constantly questioning, like, hey, why are you doing this? Like, why? Like, there's the part of me that's like, if you're committing 3, 4, 5 hours some days to training, that's hours that you're taking away from your business. That's hours that you're taking away from your productivity and your creativity. And it's like, there's definitely a part of my mind that just goes, why? Why are you bothering? But I think that that's because I am challenging myself. I am putting myself in a position where it is difficult for me to do all the things that are on my plate. It is challenging for me to consider the fact that I may be moving into state next year, and all of my clients that I've built up over the last 3 years are suddenly gone and I need to rebuild again, or the fact that I might not do any client work at the end of this and I need to build out the e-commerce side of my business, or I need to really push with this now. And there's all those sort of questions that I'm asking myself. So I wanted to preface it with that, because if you are someone that kind of making that connection, and I've talked about this in other episodes, it is simply about making that connection. There is a part of all of this that we talk about. There is a part of psychology where it's being aware of what's going on, simply being aware and being conscious of why you feel certain ways, why your brain behaves in certain ways, or why you react in certain ways, can kind of be enough of the progress that you need to make for you to make those changes. Does that make sense? It's like by simply understanding and making that connection, making that parallel between, okay, the only reason I'm feeling this is because I'm doing something positive, then all of a sudden that self-doubt can kind of create the positive feedback loop to go, okay, this is something that I should be feeling. This is something that I know I need to be feeling. And it can almost inspire you to the point where, you know, with this podcast, for example, I think that one of the things that, if I'm recording an episode and there's not the thought in the back of my mind that goes, Tom, people are going to think you're full of shit, or Tom, you're not experienced enough, or you're not old enough, or you don't have enough knowledge on this topic to be talking on this, if I'm not getting that feeling, then I know I'm not sort of, you know, that's the positive feedback loop in my head. I know that if I'm getting that feeling, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That means that I'm doing something that is challenging myself. And obviously that's a fine line to be treading. You know, figure out what it is for you, figure out what the equivalents are for you. But for me, it's a way that I can recognize, okay, I am on the right path, or okay, I'm doing something that is pushing me in the right direction. In my mind, you know, familiarity breeds complacency, but uncertainty breeds problem solving. I don't know if that's a quote that I've read anywhere. It probably is, because it sounded way too good to be coming out of my mouth, but that is it. And problem solving is what you need to get yourself to the next place. And I don't think, you know, I don't think you can learn those problem solving techniques and the techniques that I'm going to be talking about. I don't think you can learn those without having the self-doubt in the first place, without having that part of your mind that goes, oh, you're not good enough for this. I think that you need that to move to the next place. So that's all well and good. As I say in a lot of the episode, it's all very well and good for me to explain the situations that I talk about, or for me to explain the topics that I talk about, but what do I actually do that helps me? What do I actually do when I am feeling this? What have I done this week that has helped me move forward a little bit through this situation? I think that one of the things that I can't remember where I learned this, because it's something that I've used. It wasn't from a book as much as a lot of what I talk about is from books, because this is something that I have done for years. I used to really... I struggled a lot with, when I was younger, relating to sport, I struggled with performance anxiety. Almost to the point where it was crippling. Like, I remember in my final year of rowing, my performance anxiety was so extreme to the point where before anything that was of serious meaning, before time trials, before testing, before races, I didn't sleep for days before. I just could not sleep. And it wasn't a case of nothing could calm me down. It was genuine fear that I would feel prior to these events. It was like this serious, crippling fear that I would feel before these events. And I think that this is something that I learnt to develop back then, that really, really helped me then. So it's not necessarily something that I've read recently. I think I must have heard it from someone, or I heard it in a video. I can't remember what it was. But yeah, back then what I would do is I learned to personify my inner critic. I learnt to personify that anxiety. I learnt to personify, and this is something that you can sort of carry into, and it's not a one-trick solution to anxiety. I'm not trying to tell you it is. I still feel those feelings a lot. I still feel that fear of accomplishing what I set out to do. I still feel that fear of not being up to a level that I expect from myself, or that others expect from me. I still feel those things, but I think that I've sort of learnt to live with them. And I think that's kind of the overall theme of a lot of what I talk about. Is it's not about eliminating. It's never about eliminating your anxiety, or eliminating your insecurities, or eliminating your feelings of self-doubt or imposter syndrome. It's about learning to, I like to say, because it works really, really well with especially inner critics, is don't silence them, give them a voice. And you do that by personifying your inner critic, or personifying your anxiety, or personifying your imposter syndrome. Give that thing a voice. Because when you give your inner critic, for example, let's bring this back to the topic of today's, the overall topic, but you can take this and sort of link it to whatever you're going through, link it to whatever you're feeling, because it is something that has helped with my anxiety. It is something that's helped with my, behavior, say, situations where maybe, for example, in relationships, like I spoke about last, or was it 2 episodes ago, where my neediness is brought on by anxiety, and then the behaviors that I respond with are usually that fight or flight. I use this technique with that. It's by going, okay, this is just that part of my brain. Because once you personify it, once you give that inner critic a voice, once you give that anxiety a voice, suddenly that thing becomes tangible. Suddenly that part of you becomes tangible. When something's intangible, it's unfamiliar and abstract. It's just a thought that's kind of floating around inside your head, and you're not really aware of when it's there and when it's not. You don't know what it is. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know what it sounds like. You don't know what it behaves like, and you don't know why it does the things that it does. But once you give it a voice, once you personify it, then it kind of becomes something that you're familiar with. It becomes something that you can recognize over and over again. And the more that you begin to recognize it, then the more you can just go, it's like your mate who gets, we've all got those mates who they're just bad drunks. Whenever they get drunk, you sort of go, oh, that's just old mate. That's just him. That's the way he is. And you know how to deal with that person when they're in that difficult situation, because you've become so familiar with it. You've recognized it every single time it comes up, and you can go, okay, I know how to cope with this. It's the same thing here. Once that becomes tangible, once you recognize it, then it becomes so much easier to manage. So much easier to manage. And you can do this however you feel necessary. I've got a couple notes down here because I wanted to cover this point well, because it is something that has helped me a really massive amount. And it's kind of feeling good now talking about this, because I haven't done this week. I should have sat down and done this, but I haven't. This is kind of becoming your free therapy, I guess. Like, for myself, I'm sitting here talking this through, but you can do this however you feel necessary. You can label these people, and I say people because it's going to make sense in a second. You can label these, you can simply acknowledge them, and that can be enough for you. You can go, okay, that's my X inner critic, or that's my Y. For me, I like to turn them into characters. I like to turn them into, and it sounds bizarre, I know. It sounds crazy, I know. But I like to turn them into characters that I can sort of label and recognize and become familiar with, become mates with, because every single time they pop up, I can go, okay, that's just the part of my brain that does Y. That's the part of my brain that distracts me from X. For me, I have, how many is it? I think it's 5 key characters. Yeah, for me, I have five characters that really, This sounds so weird. I've never said this out loud. It's usually just me journaling in my notebook. But I have 5 characters that kind of play a role in my feeling of doubt, my feeling of imposter syndrome, and whenever I am feeling kind of inadequate, these are kind of the 5 characters that play a continuous role. It's kind of like a cinematic universe for anxiety and self-doubt. The first one is the what's the point, Tom? Here's the part of my brain that sits back and goes, why bother? Why bother? Here's the part of my brain that's responsible for a lot of my questioning of my training this week. A lot of the questions that ran through my head this week were, am I feeling so unproductive because I'm so exhausted from my training? And that led to a situation where, did I say what the fuck, Tom? What's the point, Tom, is what I meant to say in case I said it wrong. But that's when what's the point, Tom, comes up and essentially goes, why are you bothering with this? No one's going to actually care if you don't do this Ironman. No one's going to actually care if you don't post this video. No one's going to actually care if you do X, Y, and Z or don't do X, Y, and Z. And what's the point, Tom, is kind of the part of me that's, a little bit nihilistic, that goes, why are you bothering? Why are you doing this? Why do you work so hard? Why do you feel like you need to be a creative? Why can't you just go and get a normal job? Why can't you just do this? Why can't you just relax? Why can't you just do whatever? Why don't you just blow off your entire weekend or blow off this podcast or say screw it to the world? It's that nihilistic part of you that kind of, just says, fuck it, do everything that you want to do. There's Terrified Tom, who's probably the most consistently in my head. It's the voice that comes up and goes, maybe you should have just gone to university. Maybe you should have just studied law. Maybe you should have just studied business. Maybe you should have just gone and gotten a normal job and clocked in and clocked out. Maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe you should start thinking about a plan B. Terrified Tom is the part of my brain that, is constantly bringing up situations where I'm going to fail, is constantly bringing up situations where this isn't going to work out, is constantly bringing up examples of why I'm not doing the right thing, or figuring out the dots of, you've had a really bad week, this situation going on with coronavirus right now, the uncertainty of it not finishing, and from that comes up with the idea of, okay, maybe you should start thinking about a job. That's the part of my brain that Terrified Tom is responsible for. There's Distracted Tom, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's the part of me that insists on sitting here and watching YouTube rather than planning for this podcast or recording this podcast. There's Comparison Tom, which is a really, really big part of me as a creative. I think that I wish that I could sit here and go, I'm noble and I never ever get bitter about other people's success. I never sit there and compare myself to others. I am always just conscious of what I'm doing, but it's just not true. It's flat out not true. There is, on a daily basis, I'm bitter about someone's success, or I'm constantly in the back of my mind going, they're just luckier than I am, or they're just more successful than I am, or they're just better or more talented, or they were born more talented than I am. And I think that it is something that I have certainly gotten better at, but it's something that I grew up a lot with. I grew up with the chip on my shoulder of, I have to work twice as hard as everyone else to achieve what everyone else does. That wasn't from a place of discipline. That wasn't from a place of hard work. That was from a place of genuinely being bitter over the fact that I wasn't as gifted as other people with certain things, with certain activities or sport or the way I looked or whatever it was. That came from a place of bitterness. That came from a place of, I thought that everyone else had it better off than I did, which is ridiculous. I think that that's something that I certainly need to get better at, but it's something that I deal with. And the last one is Doubtful Tom, which falls under the opinion of, why would anyone listen to this podcast? It's the voice in the back of my mind that's constantly sitting there going, why do you feel like you have enough experience to talk on this topic? Why do you feel like anyone's going to listen? Why do you feel like anyone cares? There's the doubt that constantly fills my mind that's like, why are you doing any of this? What do you feel entitled? Do you feel like Do you feel like anyone cares? Do you feel like anyone should care? There's those voices that are constantly in the back of my head that are kind of reminding myself of the doubt in my mind, the possibility of coming across in a way that I didn't intend, or being seen as something that I didn't intend on being seen as. So now that you've got my 5 characters in mind, and they can be different characters for you. You can use my characters if you want, whatever you want to do. These are just the 5 that are most prevalent in my head. Why do I do this? Why do I give these people names? Why do I give them their own characters and give them traits and describe them in certain ways? The reason why I do this is because you can become familiar with them. The reason why I do this is because you can start to recognize them as having certain responsibilities in your own head. I know when distracted Tom comes up that I need to be more strict with my time. I know that I've given myself too much leeway, and I know that I've given myself too many opportunities to be distracted, and I need to do things that are going to keep me from being distracted. For example, turning my phone off in the morning and leaving it in my underwear drawer until 4 p.m. That's something that I do on a routine. That's something that I have started doing on a daily basis that is incredibly helpful to me. But I know if I sit my phone there on my desk next to me, that distracted Tom is going to come out. I know that terrified Tom only comes out because I'm in an uncomfortable situation. I know that the only reason he comes out is because there is uncertainty at the moment. I know that he doesn't come out when I'm comfortable, or when I'm doing things that make me feel comfortable, or when things are going well. The only time he comes out is when things get tough. So I can sort of recognize that, like I said before, and go, okay, there's a reason why he's come out now. There's a reason why that voice is in my head now. And I can sort of take that and go, okay, this is normal. This is normal. This is something that I recognize. This is a situation that I feel comfortable in. There's the what's the point, Tom? I think that that's one of the most powerful ones for me, is because there is no point to a lot of what we do. There is no point to me doing an Ironman. There's no point to me doing this podcast. I don't make any money from this. There's no point in me doing a lot of the things that I do. But I think that that's kind of where your character can shine through, is how much of those things are you disciplined enough to do? How many times do you have that thought that comes up in the back of your mind that goes, what's the point? Because I see that as a value thing. I see that as, okay, if that voice is coming up a lot, then I'm obviously doing things that are unnecessarily challenging. And I think that that's kind of a good place for me to be in. If I'm constantly driving my decisions around how can this make me money, or how is this going to make me feel good, or how is this going to do that, it's that failure to delay gratification. It's that failure to go, it's the desire to just have that instant gratification. It's the exact thing that I just said a second ago, but it is that feeling of, okay, I need to feel X now. I need to feel this right now. I need to feel good right now. I need to get the fruits of this labor right now, rather than I want to put in time because I'm passionate about this, or I enjoy this, or this is important to me, even though it's important to no one else. Even though when I first started this podcast, it was not important to anyone else, even though the Ironman is not something that is important to anyone else, I'm doing it because it's important to me. And I think that that's kind of, I can see that and I can spit in the face of what's the point, Tom, and go, I'm sorry, bro, but this is something that is important to me. Yes, I acknowledge that no one else cares. Yes, I acknowledge that this is something that I don't need to be doing, but it's something that I want to do. And I think that that's kind of how you can start to use these characters as, the groups that come to your table, the people that you hang out with, it comes back to that analogy, which I kind of like, is the drunk friend. It's like, once you understand that that's just the way they are when they get drunk, you know how to handle that situation. You know that, okay, once he gets like this, we should probably start giving him water and figuring out how we're going to get him home. That's sort of something that you can start to set up a game plan for dealing with those situations. The last thing I do as well, and I think that it's all very well and good to label them, but something I like to do, an exercise that I play in my head, is I play out the situations that these inner critics desire. And I said this a few weeks ago. It's the what's the alternative question. It's the question that I play out in my head of, say I'm in a long workout and the voice comes in my head like, quit. It's time to quit. It's time to get off the bike, or it's time to stop running, or it's time to stop swimming, or it's time to, it's time to throw away this book, or it's time to stop making this YouTube video, or it's time to stop recording this podcast. There's no reason that I need to keep talking right now. I could end it right now and call it a day, but it's that voice that comes up and goes, it's time to quit. It's asking yourself, what is the alternative? And I think a little exercise that I like to play, and this is probably one of the most valuables. I should have started with this, but hey, we're here now. I think one of the most valuable things that I do for my imposter syndrome, for my self-doubt, is I actually play out that scenario in my head. If I have the feeling that comes up of, and let's use a very relevant topic, this week I've had a lot of the feelings of, maybe I should start thinking about a plan B. Maybe I should have gone to uni. Maybe I should have gotten a job. Maybe I should have done whatever. And there's no reason why I'm feeling those things. Like, I am in a position where I have a bit of savings. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I've still got a little bit of work coming in as well. I've still got clients that have locked me in for once all of this is over on a kind of ad hoc basis. I'm okay. But there is that voice in the back of my head that goes, maybe you should quit. Maybe you should give up on this and start to think about a plan B. Let's take that consideration and figure out what the alternative actually is. Let's play out that voice in the back of my head. Say I do quit and I go and get a job and I sell all my camera gear and I sell all this gear and I go and get a job. A year from now, am I going to be happy with that decision? A year from now, I'm going to sit back and go, what if I had just continued going for a little bit longer? What if I was only a month away from the moment where it all worked out? What if I was only a year or 2 years or 3 years away from the situation where I would be fulfilled? What happens if I do go down that route of the plan B and it just end up in a situation where I'm unhappy? I end up young in a job that I don't enjoy with no other options. That's the alternative. A really simple example is the one that I brought up a few weeks ago. Is like, if I'm an hour and a half into a 3-hour bike ride and the voice starts coming up saying quit, what's the alternative? What, I get off the bike and in 10 minutes regret getting off the bike? Or do I just gut it out and get another 90 minutes done and then be happy? It's like the alternative is not better. And usually that's the case. Usually the alternative for these feelings of self-doubt, usually the alternative that your inner critic is recommending is not going to make you happier. It's not going to make you more fulfilled. It's not going to make you more successful. In fact, 99 or 100% of the time, it's actually going to make you less happy, less fulfilled, and less successful if you follow that inner critic. So go down that path. Actually play it out in your own head. Figure out what the alternative actually is and use that as your motivation. I think it was Jordan Peterson once said, it's like, having a goal is great motivation, but having something you're running away from is even better. If you've got a lion chasing after you or you've got a chocolate cake in front of you, which one's going to motivate you more to run? Usually it's going to be the lion. And the analogy that he uses, or that is the analogy that he uses, but he talks about it as like, what would your life be like if you failed to do the things that you know you need to do? What would your life turn out like if you did listen to that inner critic? That's going to oftentimes or all the time be far, far scarier and therefore far more motivating, because that's the line. That's what you're running away from. And I think that that's something that works incredibly well for me, is like, that's what keeps me in line. That's what motivates me far more than the idea of, being successful, the idea of, I've said this in the podcast before. One of my biggest motivators is I want to buy a house. I want to buy a house. I want to have a wife. I want to have kids. I want to have a happy family, and I want to support them financially. That's one of the biggest motivators for me doing what I do, is the potential to do that one day, is the potential for one day to live in a house with a happy wife, kids, enough room for them to sort of roam around and play, and all of us to be in this happy environment. That's something that motivates the fuck out of me. But what also motivates the fuck out of me is being unhappy, being in a situation where I'm not fulfilled. Because that dream can come from an unhappy workplace, but being in that unhappy environment, being not fulfilled, being not being able to live a creative life, not being able to use my creativity as something that gets me to that goal is just as motivating, if not more, than that goal in mind. And I think that comes by, playing it out in your head. Play out that situation. Play out that reality. Figure out what that would actually look like for you. Because I promise you, it's not going to be as good as what you're currently doing is going to make you feel. If you're doing something that's difficult, yes, it might be difficult. Yes, it might feel like shit. Yes, it might hurt. Yes, it might be draining. Yes, it might be late one night and you've got a project that's due the next day, and you could just blow it off and tell them that you got sick, or you could tell them that, hey, the situation here in Melbourne's making me feel really bad. I'm sorry about the fact that this is going to be late. You could do all of those things. But that's going to make you feel way worse than just gutting it out and getting it done. So I hope that this has helped. I do hope that this has helped. It's helped me, honestly. I feel a lot better now having had this conversation with you guys. I think that that's a cool thing about this podcast, is that I do get to just sit here and have that conversation with you guys rather than having to figure it out on my own, in my own mind. And I feel productive doing it. I think that's the thing, is like I get to the end of these podcasts and I feel so good that I've finished another one, and I feel so good that I'm continuing to, was it Matthew McConaughey or who was it that, maybe it was Tom Cruise. I'm not a huge fan of either of them, Tom Cruise or Matthew McConaughey, but one of them said this and I really did resonate with it. It's like, don't break the chain. I feel so amazing every single time I get to the end of these podcasts because I haven't broken the chain. I've continued that rhythm. I've continued this momentum. But I also get to sit here and talk things over in a way that kind of feels therapeutic. It's like I have had a pretty shitty week. I've had a pretty average week where I just felt flat. And I think that this has kind of put me in a position now where I've acknowledged that and I've talked it over. And now I get to move forward, but I also have a podcast that's finished, and I can now put this out and feel productive in the sense that I've done the thing that I said I was going to do. And I think that that's why I'm so glad that I'm doing this. I'm so glad that I've chosen this topic especially, because it is just something that I'm super passionate about. It is something that I really enjoy talking about. It is a topic that I hope it shows. I hope it shows that I am super passionate about this topic. I am super passionate about talking about this stuff because it's just what I enjoy. I would probably be talking about it even if it wasn't on the podcast setting. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've actually really, really enjoyed recording it. I'm not going to say it because I've said it every week, but I hope it's cohesive. I hope it does bring you guys some value. And if it has, if you have enjoyed this episode, or if you've enjoyed any of the episodes so far, I've said this over and over again, but I enjoy saying it. If you have, I would really, really appreciate it if you could share the podcast with a friend. Share it with someone you think might appreciate it. Share it with someone who you think may find value in anything that I've said, or a particular episode, or a particular moment, or maybe they're just an artist and you think they'd resonate with anything I've said. Whatever it is, whatever reason that you can find for sharing the podcast with them, let them know that they should listen to it, because I would really appreciate that and it would really, really help me out a lot. But as always, I'm not your dad. You don't have to do anything I tell you to do. All of this is entirely up to you, and I'll speak to you guys next week.